and then we'll start recording. Wait, add spotlight. Okay, so hi, Lou.
Hi.
It's so great to be here with you.
Thank you for having me on. And this is such a beautiful, just kind of time and poignant time to be doing this, as well as I'm so excited that I get to be the first guest. Like this is, on the side of the break. So thank you again.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so for just a way of introduction, so because for the recording in part, but Today Must Be Sunday is an ongoing series talking about spirituality, feminism, writing, magic, art, the intersection of all of these, and really about also, I think Lou and I will talk more about this, and especially during this time, but like how to hold that crossroads energy within our being as we, look toward a very, as we exist in a present moment and in a very uncertain future too, right? And so Lou, so just to get us kind of started, I would love to hear a little bit about your own kind of story and practice. Like we first met, well, I've been hearing about you for years from our shared kin, Sela Satterstrom. So, as long as I've been having conversations about divination with Sela, I've been hearing your name. But then I had the honor of studying, taking a class with you. That was a class, you were running sort of two classes concurrently, one for people of color and one for white allies around magic and hoodoo practice. And that was just really powerful and amazing. It was I still remember getting stuck in this either or thinking, and you saying something about, hoodoo is the understanding that there's always 1,000 elegant solutions or possibilities for something. And so I'd love to hear, just a little bit about where you come from, how your practice has evolved, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And just thank, for Queens, specifically Sela and Kristen, for even having this forum, because talk about a crossroads space, right? Like the verb being the one of the ultimate, like, kind of crossroads in between places where anything's possible, both, in all the spectrum of being. So it's really beautiful to be here. And, of course, to you and Shameka as well, for the amazing work that y'all are doing. Like, I applaud you big time for this type of work, because I think even just creating these spaces is a form of magic, is a form of, bringing out possibility, again, in all the spectrums and ways that we can kind of contend with it. My own journey, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of places where I was doing healing as well as exploration, as well as just trying to find out who I am and was and continue to be. In terms of like the story that I give folk all the time, I think I was probably 3, 4, and I just remember we had these really, in the house that I grew up in, like these really crazy ass 70s curtains with like indigo flowers, and there were yellows, and like it was insane, right? And so we had these sliding glass doors, the curtains were right in front, and there was that moment where the sun beams were kind of peeking through, and of course also into the curtains, because the curtains were really shabby, so you could still see the sun in certain ways. And I just remember kind of talking to those beings, talking to the light itself, that there was not only were there like people in the light, the actual beings that I could see, but the kind of the essence of that moment, the spirit, the zeitgeist. But it's more than the zeitgeist, it's the spirit with a capital S, so to speak. And what I mean by that is like divinity, a point where we meet divinity, a point where the universe can just open up, and you're no longer you're that whole environment, you're that whole kind of, you're you and the space and the conversation and all the connections that are happening right now. So I think that that's one of my first moments of feeling in spirit, of kind of being in those magical moments of possibility and kind of awakening. And there's been a whole bunch more. I grew up in Texas in a small like chicken farm on the like east, I want to say an hour and a half east of Dallas, Fort Worth area. And so was close, like 2 hours away, Shreveport, like Louisiana. I want to say 5 hours up was Oklahoma. So all those areas were very, and I didn't know until years later, but just very entrenched with magic as more than kind of that thought form, or more than just the way that it's on charms, like magic as the land itself, as consciousness that is imbued in land that creates kind of spirit in certain ways. And so, like, how could I not be who I am now, if that makes sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. And I want to, so just, I mean, I think that's, first of all, I so relate to that childhood experience of knowing spirit, or knowing that there's this something else, a different kind, like the tone of air shifts in that moment, and you can feel something, come into presence, including yourself. Your own spirit responds to the call, right? And I think that gets, covered over with so much culture and trauma, and we get so disconnected from that. And which leads me, so I've had the pleasure of starting to read your book that's coming out. It's coming out in 2022, right?
Yeah, February 15th.
February 15th?
Yes, it's already on Amazon for pre-sale.
Okay, we should definitely link it. But and I'm trying to look in my notes. Okay, it's The Modern Art of Brujeria, a beginner's guide to spellcraft, medicine making, and other traditions of the global South. So a lot in the beginning, you're talking about what is a bruja, a brujer. I don't, and there seems to be this thing of, talking about coming into relationship and being attuned to the relationship, but also there's a lot that you're talking about coming back into an awareness and in a relationship with that thing that's inside too. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And I think that even in terms of kind of what we have been going on, and I'm also in more of the Afro-Caribbean traditions. I'm a Babalawo, a high priest, and so even in terms of, how would I put it, that there's just a lot of racism and imperialism and misogyny and sexism that has completely destroyed how we even recognize what spirit is, and how we are it, and that it is us. And so part of my work is very much about decolonizing, like the Hollywood version of thinking that just because I ring a bell, a mermaid's going to appear right in front of me, right? And that an altar is just, that spirit can't, or that I have to have an altar, an exterior space where I have to pray, right? Or this kind of exteriority of divinity and the in a lot of both brujeria, and what I mean by brujeria, it's the Spanish word for witchcraft, and that basically from 1492 on, anything that was deemed not Christian, and so everything that was not white, everything that was native, everything that was other than what those kind of practices were inherently witchcraft and of the devil. Mm-hmm. So there's a way, and even the word itself is a colonized word that was brought in, I believe, through Arabic during the whole expulsion of Muslims and Jews, as 1492 happened within Spain itself. I believe Isabel and Ferdinand, and when they got together as a couple to create the sovereignty of Spain, it was expel everybody that was not white and Spanish. So that's where a lot of the first burning times, like the witch hangings were happened, the Inquisition, all that. And it's all in the book too, in terms of how that comes into Latin America. And the reason why I even talk about Global South is that, I mean, indigenous folk were in the world in North and South America and the Caribbeans way before any type of Latinness, came over. So, and even Hispanic, right? Like it denotes this place where Spain, where Europe came over, and that was the beginning of the time frame. F that, right? So all these kind of conversations around how do I name myself and how do I reclaim what I do, not as a negating force or as a devilish force, but as a place of really being kind of attuned to nature, attuned to seasons, attuned to like the inner changings that then create the outer changings. And so like some of the tenets, and I know this is a big conversation, right? I'm going many different tangents, so stick with me. But some of the tenets is that kind of spirit exists, and and that there's an emanating spirit. That kind of the place, where are my own thoughts coming from? Where do I have the inclination to even think of a thing, to utter a thing, right? And so if thought comes before action, if I have to have the electronical impulse for thought to come before action, where does that impulse begin? What's the emanating energy? What's the emanating force where that kind of comes into play? And so in my traditions, both like brujeria, they talk about anima, right? Which is the soul, but it's more than the soul. It's the animating essence that then reaches into the thoughts, that then reaches into the action, right? So it's like a glove. Imagine like putting on a glove, that there's the actual fabric, but it doesn't become a glove until the hand reaches in, right? And so that in certain ways, that emanating spirit, that like anima, or in Yoruba it's called the ori, is the not just the reflection, but is inherently tied to the consciousness of being in existence, to the God force, to the creator force. And so that is a mirror, and not just a mirror, but is the same as, that is constantly speaking into each other to create beingness. And so I know that's a lot of woo-woo, but that's kind of where I'm going.
No, yeah, I think that well, as you're talking, I don't think it's a lot of woo. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, one of the things that you talk about I read another shorter piece of yours on the craft of witchcraft, and really you're talking about also writing poetry, right? From a craft perspective, but there's a line in there where you say you're talking to someone who, like a witch, who said that that in many ways the art of witchcraft is learning to separate illusion from what's real, right? From the sleight of hand, from the actual shifts of, or the shifting nature of being, I think was the line. And so it seems like, going back to this thing of the animus, that there's, first of all, the illusion of our disconnection, the illusion of that we're somehow that we are individual and not connected to each other and to all sentience, right? Yeah. But also, for me as a person just living in the world, it is like that I get interested too in how do you parse that ways that I do feel disconnected at times, right? I do, not even at times, that is the kind of default state. And so I don't know, I guess I'm curious to hear, it's like that process of sort of moving into that process of reconnection. And what is it, do you think, that that gets in between so much, aside from egoic mind, or and way too big of a question, but I'm curious to just hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that all the ways in which we get taught to be other than that is number one. That even from a very early age, we want to reproduce we're like kind of the pedagogy is to kind of, I mean, not just kind of, but to exteriorize like the world, that I'm expected whenever I pray to see Jesus. And if I don't see Jesus, then I'm sinful, right? I'm expected to do A, B, and C. And if the result is an exterior result, then something's wrong with me, right? But how do we, you know, this is what I teach my students kind of in Orisha, you know, tradition is, how do we invite like Oshun, the mother of sweetness and joy and all that, like into the rivers of the body, versus just thinking that I ring a bell, I say a prayer, she's gonna just appear as this mermaid in front of me. And that there's a very like, it's part of colonization that all of us have gone through, not just people of color. But, you know, one of my elders was saying basically that European history, they had to do it first to themselves before they were able to go out and spread that to the world. So all of us have been colonized in many ways. And that there's a sense that that's the mind frame that we have to be in to produce everything that we're producing, to be in the same mind frame of like the ecological disasters, and even in the ways that we are looking at them, how colonized the perspective we are engaging to deal with it, right? So there's for me, this sense of like, what really is critical thinking? And how do we start to deprogram all these places where it has to be an outside change, because the change always happens internally before it comes out. Like, and it doesn't matter what it is, like I have to think about it before I do it. And even if it's just a second of thought, that's a change. That's a switch off and on. And so there's like, just even getting to that recognition is important. The other thing that I work with a lot with students, and especially whenever it comes to the ancestors, right? That they think that it's all this one monolithic ancestral voice, you know, coming down. As much as there are different voices in our own like families, those are the spectrum of ancestral voices. And one will say this and blah, 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 you know, and that all of those are speaking every cell of our bodies. All of those voices are speaking every cell of our bodies, and those constituent voices, not just my own emanating voice, but all those constituent voices that have, you know, played a part, whether it's in the actual physical cell or in the spiritual cell, the places where we have rubbed up against each other and we have created connection. All those are speaking all at once, which creates my whole essence, which creates my whole being. And that type of like, to think that we are, that, how to put it, that unity, that when we think of the soul or the animus as a singular is bullshit, that it is a plurality of all of these voices and emanations all speaking together. You know, how is it that all the bacteria in my gut are playing a role just as much as, and how do those function together on a physical, much less like all of the beings that have created like all the little, you know, cells, all the little impulses in every cell of my body. So even whenever I like to just kind of deconstruct all these kind of places of the voice, if that makes sense.
It absolutely. I'm like trying to take notes because it's like speaking every cell. I'm like, that's so beautiful. Yeah, so I just love how also you're articulating this, and also to think about, so which leads me to another question, you know, around ancestry, that there's the ancestry that we're born into, there's the ancestry that we choose, right? There's our, and you know, and the ancestry that's actually also in our present, like you and I, Lou, we're ancestors of each other already, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which again, it's another a different way to really think about, you know, what it means to be together and be in time, right? in another I heard this interview with you on a podcast called like the Queer Spirit podcast, and which from a few years ago. It's totally fun to hear you. And but you spoke on that about so speaking of like chosen ancestry, that you did this, you worked for a while, like you had a 3-year altar project working with Audre Lorde, and I just thought that the way that you talked about that as opening this kind of site for like deep listening and deep inquiry into Audre Lorde's work, into her sort of energy and her activism. I just, it was so moving. And also I thought, well, this like such a like fabulous model to also, I'm like, oh God, this is going to be my research methodology from now on, right? Like why, so I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit about what that was, like what you did.
Absolutely. And also I want to remind me of this, but I kind of, it's interesting to kind of think of that project and then also think of where I'm at now in my craft and how I would do things differently, if that makes sense,
Yes, absolutely.
But so and it just came out of, because I was trying to write my senior thesis for just graduating my BA,
Mm-hmm.
and I really was just stuck. And part of my stuckness was that a lot of it, I was dealing with like exactly the things that we're talking about now, like what is the erotic, and not just the erotic in terms of sexual pleasure, like really looking at eros, and then also looking at it in terms again of like, kind of some of these Afro-Caribbean concepts and the spirit of the erotic, right? And connections and bridges and manifestation and all that kind of stuff. So I was just kind of getting stuck in that heady intellectualism and how easy that is to go into as a fallback for whenever I feel insecure or for whenever I feel like just that I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I pushed up against that. And honestly, it's some of the work that Sela and I have done together, like truthfully, she really has inspired a lot of my own craft, which is like some deep stuff. I love that ancestral, right? The ancestral connection, right? But the whole idea was, how do I really invite, like, if I'm talking about the erotic, how the hell do I invite the erotic in my life to talk to me? And that there's also a part that is that because that is wanting that connection and that is already speaking to the erotic, but that is underneath the surface, versus like fully giving myself permission to go into it, right? Because again, where does the thought come from to go there? Right? There wasn't already a connection that was being made in my own self that wanted to be remembered, right? And so what I did was I created an altar, and literally, I think I had researched like all her like kind of favorite different colors, all like some of the perfumes that sometimes she mentioned, or like the scents that she mentioned at different points in her writing, and just laying my heart open and asked that, and it wasn't anything specific in terms of like lighting a specific candle at 7 p.m. and saying a prayer. No, like it was much more of giving myself permission to actually talk and engage her spirit, knowing that she was already speaking to me in some form or fashion, or else I wouldn't have had the inkling to actually do it, if that makes sense. And so really inviting her into my life. And an elder had given me an assignment, like in my own ancestral work, of like basically invite, like whenever I wanted to work with a specific ancestor and didn't have their name or anything like that, I would do a little penny candy offering and ask that, like on my ancestral altar, that for that day, whatever, however they wanted to appear, whether that was in song, on the radios, certain colors that I was drawn to, foods that I was drawn to, even topics of conversation, any type of environmental way that they wanted to show me who their essence was, that I invited them to do that. And of course, started with the transcendent ancestors, nobody who's like, in their own trauma, right? And I hope that Audre Lorde, like in my opinion, she's that lady. So like, I knew that there wasn't going to be like any type of effed up stuff that was going to be coming into my life, right? So So I did the same thing. I gave her, just a simple little penny candy, It didn't have to be about this big suggestion. It was just I recognize you. I want to give you something from my heart. I'm inviting you into my world to like speak to me sensorily. And that will tell me who you are, that will give me an insight as to your essence, your like beingness. And invite that kind of invite that into conversation versus just I can quote a quote on page 52 of some journal and blah 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 blah, right? Like, because that doesn't give us anything. And I think that part of my own methodology and scholarship, like recently, has just been around, if I want to invite them to my altar table, then why am I using them in a book or a quote or a, right? And so, right, like who's really speaking and why do they have that? Why should they speak if we're not aligned? Why do they have access to me? And let me revoke that access and be conscious of like, who am I speaking to? Are they liberated or are they just some dead person? Because a dead person does not make an ancestor.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling that. So in other words, just to make sure I heard this correctly, if you wouldn't invite them to your altar, then why would you quote them in a book?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And I've had to really like, and that's also
wow.
colonization work is to look at who said it, like who said it, what was the context, why are they given authority? Just because they're dead and they wrote something doesn't mean that they had any more than me.
Absolutely. No, and well, and that's interesting. There's a couple things that I'm thinking of, but first of all, I love the way that this, earlier today, Shameka and I were talking about, when we were doing our prep call, it's like, we like to give the advice to other people of trust your intuition, but then that thing of like, how do you actually build your trust with your own intuition is so hard. And what I love about this way that you've described the penny candy and the altar, and to invite the ancestor or spirit or whoever to speak in whatever way, it's also about learning to trust what it is that you're experiencing, which is trusting your intuition, right?
Absolutely. The inherent divinity that is already in full liberation that's inside of us, not some like exteriorized, I have to be on the journey towards. It already exists. It just wants to be recognized and to be like liberated, and liberated in terms of, are we really hearing our own inherent like Buddha nature or whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so then the other piece about if you wouldn't invite them to your altar, why would you quote them? Which I'm going to be sitting with that because
Me too.
Yeah, but it makes me also think about again in the book and in some of your writings and then in my own work, where you talk about like an individual spell, like a spell working is always about a broader social system, like a spell work that is bringing healing or bringing liberation to oneself is also always about a larger collective liberation, right? And I think about, and then also that the way that we order words and sounds and names and other kinds of things is a kind of spell work. And so that leads me to this question about writing and art making and the ways of, I don't exactly know what my question is, except my question is this so broadly of like making work that also has this liberatory potential. I don't know.
I have some thoughts.
Great.
And I've been kind of writing into this too, like, because I love how spirit works, right? And our spirits and all that, all the conversations that we've already had. But that basically, in many different societies throughout the world, pre-industrialization, there is this idea of like, again, that emanating spirit as a concept of a bird, right? and the bird that is in flight, the bird that is right. And then that gets like thrown into the whole dove later, you know, right? Exactly. And so you see this in like hieroglyphics. You see this whenever you're, you know, looking at like a lot of European-based, you know, folk magic and folklore. And in some of my own traditions, you know, what we talk about is like at the end of the day, a witch only needs her bird, right? She only needs her spirit. She only needs that everything else is exteriorized. And so I don't need the candle. I don't need all that to be the witch to manifest, right? I just need to be able to take, like, I need to have my spirit take flight. I need to like, it's that moment, the Nine of Pentacles moment, right? And so I talk about like artwork and art making as a perch for our birds to land, you know.
Oh, amazing.
To land, you know, that's what, like any witch, anybody, like any form of creativity is that moment where we're inviting that emanation to land. We can't compel it. All we can do is create the perch for it to possibly get there, but that's it. That's the best that we can do, or the best that I can do. Maybe somebody else can do better, but like, you know, at the end of the day, we're just creating these spaces for them to land, you know.
I love that so much. that no, I love that so much. That's absolutely, you know. Yeah. Well, we're kind of, let's see here. I'm looking at the time, and Shameka, do you want to come in with a question here? And also, I don't know if people have questions, this would also be a good time to post them in the chat.
Yes, I was trying to type and answer you at the same time. Yes, you can post your questions in the chat. And I guess this has just been such a great conversation, and I'm like trying to take notes also. But a lot of what I'm hearing too is just the balance between this huge idea, which isn't so huge, of possibility and practicality, which I don't know if that word is like, I don't know if it contains enough of what I'm trying to say, but in moving through the world, like how do you balance this, you know, the possibility of all that there is, and like with connecting with spirit, ancestors, magic, and then the everyday, which it all goes together, but sometimes, you know, is, you know, the balance of moving and taking one step at a time, and, you know, getting up in the morning. What, I don't know, I guess the question is, what does that look like for you? And then maybe for someone like me who's also trying to balance that, but also being someone who is trying to be that light in my own circle, my own, like a family of friends who might see that, but then how do I give like a sense of something that they can hold, you know, without it being not necessarily too woo-woo for them, or too big or too much to contain. I don't know if that's
yeah. Like, and that's I mean, because it's the praxis, right? How do we actually do what we're talking about, which is again part of witchcraft. Like, it has to be practical. If it doesn't work, then don't do it. Like, that was one of the biggest things that my elders used to say, was like, if we're just going through ritual just to go through ritual and it's not creating the change, then why the fuck are we doing it? Excuse my French, you know? And so it's for me, so some of the practices that I do just as my own praxis. So like before I actually get up in the morning, unless I really have to go use the bathroom, I try and just say hey to myself, if that makes sense. So literally, like, I go to each part of my body and just say, you know, good morning, basically, you know, and really kind of every part of myself trying to just, hey, I hear you. You know, what do you have to say? Those kind of little check-ins, because I know for me, you know, it might look crazy if, you know, especially, you know, with some other exes, you know what I mean? Like waking up and doing that kind of stuff. But it actually like, it works for me. If it doesn't work for somebody else, then don't do it, you know? But like that place of like really on a core level checking in. And then even in terms of like, you know, because I get those rage moments. I've gotten a lot of rage moments on the freeway recently, like where people cut me off, like all that kind of stuff. And I like have that like instinct to like just kind of curse the living crap out of somebody. And like, you know, and it hasn't been easy, you know, recently because they've really gotten on me, especially these LA drivers. Like it is a whole different mess. But where I notice, like, honestly, it's the voice of my mom. Like that's like, you know, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, and then I'm like, what the, you know, I didn't even, it's not even about that she was, it's just that moment where she rubbed up against me in a way that helped me really like kind of help discern my own anger or discern my own impulses, you know, all those moments that her voice was speaking to mine. And so regardless of whether or not it's her or not, it's her inside of me that is like kind of, you know, so that kind of stuff. And then of course I still like make my oils. I still do all the witchy stuff. I'm not some, you know, I do, you know, that kind of stuff. But what I say is that's a gateway and a way to come back into spirit and come back into that bird flying versus the way, or that is going to change things. Just because I light a candle, that's not going to do it. It's not. Just because I buy like, you know, some diamond or some little, you know, fancy stone, that doesn't do crap. How am I building that relationship with it? And so that's kind of the witchcraft that I was taught. And also just what I think we're all talking about is like, how do I actually see the sentience that's in whatever I'm working with? And that we can actually create sentience too. It's not just, you know, what's found in nature, that everything's found in nature, because, you know, the whole world's nature. So like, you know, that the candle it has its own sentience as I breathe life into it, as I can join my essence with all of the beings that created that candle. Right? But the candle outside of like that magical act, it's not going to do nothing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely. Thank you. We have a few some questions in the chat. Let's see. One from Mason. What advice for developing intuitive skills around discernment when dealing with all those different types of ancestral voices and lived experience would you recommend for someone at a midpoint in their spiritual practice?
That's a beautiful question. I mean, and this is, I mean, I don't invite all the ancestors to speak. Again, I always go towards the liberated, the transcendent, the ones who like got their stuff together in certain ways, because, you know, and, you know, like even sometimes some of them can be a little bit skewed because it's all about perspective. But I think that the biggest thing is to like, when you feel the spirit, how does your body feel? Are you all like, do you immediately go up? Does it feel like you can relax? Like when you feel the presence of something, to trust that first, like how the body like reacts to it, because that will tell you way before the mind, whether or not that being's like actually a good being to be around. The other thing that I would say is, because I was always taught like before you invoke or evoke anything, learn how to cleanse, learn how to banish. And so that's for me, number one, before we invite is like, how do we cleanse? How do we remove, you know, things that are riding on us? You know, how do we even diagnose like how the body feels whenever it's not like in balance? So that way, if I get something, I know that immediately, like, again, the body's going to tell me way before the mind does that something's wrong. So if I can know what I feel like completely balanced, then I can very much diagnose whenever something's real off and like there's a spirit or something physical in my body that's going on. Because I mean, that's just kind of what spirit does. Like it comes in and it speaks through. So whatever it's speaking through, it has a natural reaction, if that makes sense. So stuff like that. And also just don't be fearful. As long as you're coming from a pure heart, and I know that sounds really woo-wooey, but not trying to F anybody up, not trying to like, contact, you know what I mean? Just like all that kind of woo, like the real woo-woo Hollywood way of kind of dealing with spirit, that, that they're usually more often than not pretty benign and, blessed and those kind of things. I think, did y'all ever read that ethnography, How About Demons? It was a really good dope one about a spirit like possession. And they were saying that, I want to say 97% of all possessions worldwide, and this was back in, I think, 2000, maybe 1997, 1998, maybe, so it's been a while. But that most of those are deity or, blessed divinity, blessed entities versus anything negative. And so even like all the demon possessions and all that, colonization talking, that you think that you open yourself up and all of a sudden, you're going to be possessed by the devil.
Oh, colonization. What did it there's a question from Sela. Lou, as it is the season, can you talk about ghosts? How would you define ghosts and favorite ghost encounter?
Oh, dang. I love this. Oh, that's good. Oh, wow. Oh, that's a heavy time. I mean, that's a whole like 5-hour conversation. I have a lot to say about ghosts. Interesting. I was actually just talking to Teresa about, does anybody know the ghost plant, which is a mushroom? It's a very translucent mushroom that grows in the northwest, northeast, or wait, no, northwest. It's somewhere up there in the Northern California, like that area of the world. But it's an interesting mushroom because it's parasitic, and so it needs a host to grow on. Ghost pipe, yes, absolutely. That's one of my favorite ones that I've been working with over the last 5 years, especially the plant spirit medicine or the plant essence around it, because and I'm just going to go into mushrooms in general. This idea of the mycelium that grows underneath, right, and how that if that mycelium wasn't present in pretty much 99.9% of soil worldwide, that there would be no flora that would be able to grow, because the flora actually travels the path of the mycelium in order to, like the root systems, in order to grab like nutrients, in order to do all that kind of stuff. And so even if we don't see the fruit of the mushroom, which is the fruit body that goes above the soil, there's still a heck of mycelium in pretty much every little bit of soil. And so I think of ghosts as the paths, like those, like not just people who passed away, but energetics that created some form of root system that is connecting, that is basically kind of connecting the whole world, or the whole, like all the livingness that is going on. And that, depending on the type of entity that you're engaging, whether it's like a tape recording or like a recording, which is like a place where trauma happens and it's just a cycle that flips over and over of that same scene, whether that's actually a cognizant, like kind of consciousness that is like here living, that's here in kind of our realm, whether that's even, and I don't know if anyone has ever had those, that, kind of the haunted space feeling, that's just the space itself feels very ghosty, or very like it has presence without actually like that, somebody passed away in. But all those things I think are kind of ghosts, but that they're in certain ways like that mycelium pathway, where some form of energetic, some form of like sentience was there that made a pathway that my roots are kind of traveling through in that moment. And so, that's kind of the way that I view ghosts now. Who knows, like 10 years from now, it could just be all, I'm crazy. So that's kind of the thing. And then one of my favorite ghost stories. Oh, there's a lot. But actually, I remember one where it was Sela and our really dear friend Carla and I were, and I think there was a couple of other people at we were at Sela's one of the apartments that Sela used to live in, this house, and we were talking about this ghost. I think her name was Ginny. I forget what her name was, but we were talking about her. Sally. Yes, Sally. And so Sally, we were talking about Sally and just all our kind of experiences of her in Sela's home. And then the fan was off and it just started to go. And Carla looked up and she was like, wow. And we all just had that moment of, she's very present. So those kind of moments really get me versus like the oogie boogie. Trust me, I've had a lot of oogie boogies and I always scream and it's like it's not a cute thing. And I'm usually the one that gets called out to clean out that stuff. So yeah. By the way, on a completely side note, for people who have low level manifestations that they're working with, like a shot glass of vinegar or apple cider vinegar, boric acid, and a little squeeze of lemon, it creates this almost like a ghost or a dog whistle on that kind of energetic pathway. And they hate it. They kind of go shooing away. That's not for things that are actually causing stuff to move or stuff like that. But if you just have that, like kind of those low lying, every once in a while you feel those kind of presences, it gets them out. But you have to put that in every room of the house, or else, like it doesn't, it's, you have to kind of guard the whole thing versus just like put it up somewhere and that won't do nothing.
We have a couple more questions, but I know that just being cognizant of time and carpooling. So I guess there's 2 more questions in the chat, but I think there might be a way to answer those offline, like maybe on the YouTube page or like, just acknowledging that those questions are there. But I know we also need to, we wanted to pull cards for everyone. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so yeah, I want to acknowledge the questions too, and then, but also maybe this will be a way to answer them indirectly. So Lou, do you feel like we should both pull a card? Do you want me to pull a card? Do you want to pull a card?
What do you feel? I trust your spirit.
I'm gonna pull one and let's both see what we say. Okay. How about, and one already popped, and it is the Popus.
Oh wait, it's not the, okay, I gotcha.
Okay, so do you want me to start?
Yeah, or whatever, I don't care either way.
Okay, well, if this was, so again, we're pulling this as sort of like, this is a message, this is spirit showing up as a message for this community, those who are gathered here right now. And so, I mean, what's interesting, I'll say a couple things and then, but this is something about holding the space between that which can be articulated and that which can't. So holding the space between language and the ineffable. And that part of the way of doing that is actually having one foot grounded on the earth, actually in, like literally in plant, on earth, in dirt, connecting in that way. And then also having a hand that is connected to like spiritual traditions, to knowledge, to wisdom, to that which is passed down. And so in my deck, she's literally holding this kind of book of the occult in one hand. This is the medieval Scapini deck that I learned on. And so I'm very attached to it still. And so, and then she also has her foot there on the earth, as you can see too. And it's also interesting, this geometric pattern that's on the other, this like, the space that she's on, that's the space of fecundity and color between the black and white geometrics, right? That is also something, that there's something very profound there about in a world that wants to have this kind of false, that actually I would say that binary is something that whiteness, to kind of go to this question, like whiteness creates that binary. And so going to the space where there's actually fecundity and actually all kinds of growth and that mycelium too, is a way of staying rooted, too. So I don't know, Lou, what do you want to say?
I applaud you. That was absolutely gorgeous and brilliant. Brilliant. So like, I just want to take a second to say that. I would love to rip off just a little bit, if you want me to. So
I do.
If you hold up that specific version of her, so the black and the white checkers are kind of symbolic or held to like the Masons, like that kind of Kabbalistic kind of view of the world, right? The pillar of severity, the pillar of like compassion. And so she's the mediator between those two. She's like not just the path of ascension, but I forget what the phrase is in alchemy, where it's like the medium path or the middle path, that things, the conduit, right? Like Anna was saying. So there's that idea that's popping up in the card. But like the way that I read her off my deck, so all of for me, all of the kind of the female cards, all are born from her. So you see her number 1 in the deck, and then you see her as the reflection on Earth and the Empress. And then you see her numbers of times, like in different iterations of like that female principle, that place of, and not female in terms of gender, but the contractive space, the place where we're called to like our own sense of authority, our own sense of like, how do we claim and be the world versus the like some of the male archetypes where it's like, I am speaking, or like I am my will, or like that force, she's the contractive moment. She's the breath out versus the breath in. Or no, she's the breath, I forget the contraction of the breath. Anyway, she's that moment of like, maybe the inhale. But like she's poised in that way. And so I always talk about what's our own authority. How do we sit in our own authority? How do we sit in we're enough? How do we sit in I don't have to do shit in order to be loved or be graced, or that I am graced? And so that all that idea of production, all that idea of effort has to be rooted in number 1, that sense of like the self that is and is always being and always becoming, versus the self that has already like forced itself, that she's the kind of the birthing of in that way. And then just on a core level, like you're saying, pay attention to our own intuition, that we're being called to our own inward altar table before the divine, that there's that call. And then also in your deck, like where she's both the priestess as well as the witch. She's the foot also represents like her being the empress of the natural world. So being the inherent witch, that's also the priestess. So that she doesn't need nothing but her own bird to fly. She doesn't need that's all that she needs, versus the wands and the tools and the woo kind of essence,
Love that. Yes. Oh my gosh. So I just have to say to everyone here, if you like Lou does amazing readings, you can book with Lou online. And so I'm also like, they're so affordable. And also like, if you ever, it's like, you really need some serious something, like Lou is your person. So I want to say that too. And Lou, it's just been such a delight to be in this space with you. Thank you so much. And please, everyone, also, I think Shameka put information in about the upcoming Four Queens. I'm going to unspotlight us, and so we'll be next month with the Visionary Future Collective and the Academic Tarot. And then in December, speaking of bird ladies, we'll be with Anna Joy Springer, who's in house here today. So excited about that. And I'm unspotlighting us, and so I can see everyone. I know Lou has to move. Lou is going to this, has been doing these witchcraft things with Dorothea Latsky, which I also highly recommend, these writing witchcraft things, and that are $27 and fantastic, tied to the moon. So he is off to do one of those. But thank you again, Lou, so much. And thank you everyone for being here. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, you guys.
Hey, AJ, thank
Hi,
you.
sweetheart.
How are you feeling?
So much better today.
Good.
I got so excited about bird things. Hi, Shameka. I don't know if we've met. I don't think so. Hi. Did we?
Oh, you're muted, Shameka. I don't think you've met before.
Okay, I thought we met in LA.
One time at Poetic Research
Oh,
Bureau.
yeah.
Yes,
Maybe,
yes.
yeah, okay. But just for a split
Yes.
second. But I think it was maybe at was it at the Swallow? Was it at Gabrielle